Hello, and thank you so much for joining. My name is Todd Sexton. I'm working, the company I work for is Identillect Technologies. We're a cybersecurity company that really focuses a lot in the medical community. We do a tremendous amount with dental practices across the United States. And we've been working closely with AIM Marketing, and they have a far reach inside the dental community. Now, my experience as a professional has really been to help.
Excuse me, Todd. Let me, I'm sorry to interrupt. Let me do the perfunctory introductions and then we'll hand it over to you. Is that all right?
Okay. Yep.
All right. So hello, everyone. This is Danny Bobrow, president of AIM Dental Marketing, and I want to welcome you to this very special installment of the Practice Perfection Web-Based Education Series. Today's presentation is entitled, Your Roadmap to Protect Your Patient's Privacy. Simple but effective steps to avoid a cyber attack and remain virus-free. Todd Sexton, MBA, is Chief Executive Officer and Cybersecurity Expert of Identillect Technologies. As you will soon hear, he is and have already heard actually, he's an accomplished speaker and an author in the field of cybersecurity and data handling regulation. Over the past 15 years, he's focused on cybersecurity compliance in an ever-changing landscape of regulatory requirements. Specifically focused on helping practice owners understand technology to work for, not against them, Todd has dedicated himself to supporting the dental community in navigating the increasingly turbulent waters of patient data handling regulations, cybersecurity threats, as well as how to prevent an attack. As an attendee today, you will learn to identify different cyber attacks, understand regulatory compliance requirements, implement actionable tactics to prevent data breach, and avoid costly HIPAA fines. Now, before we get started, I want to remind you that Practice Perfection webcasts run for around 90 minutes. Attendance at this event entitles you to receive 1.5 hours of continuing education credit with the compliments of Identillect and AIM Dental Marketing. Shortly following the webcast, you will be emailed a brief survey and quiz to receive your CE, again, at no cost to you. Excuse me. And now it is my distinct pleasure to welcome to the Practice Perfection stage, Mr. Todd Sexton. Todd, the stage is now yours.
All right. Thanks so much, Danny. Again, like I said, my name's Todd Sexton. I have been working in technology for about 15 years. I run a company called Identillect Technologies, and we really focus on making technology simple, making it easy for people in the medical communities, in the dental community, to really try to meet some of the requirements that are out there. But more importantly, is to make it as simple as possible for you to meet the needs and the security of your patients. Now, as we start to go through this lecture today, what I really like to focus on is how we can provide true assistance to you. One of the challenges that practitioners run into is they have challenges where they're starting to try to implement some of these different technologies and really not sure the scope and how they're going to go ahead and do it and make it as simple as possible. So obviously the regulatory landscape has changed a lot in the last few years. And the HIPAA audits, PHI requirements, and then the intrusions, the threats that we see are much more sophisticated. From email spoofing to social engineering to encryption ransomware. These are a lot of challenges that we're running into today that are creating a lot of the landscape that's changing the way we're able to communicate with patients. So some of the challenges is, what are you going to do as a practitioner, and how are you going to put your efforts? Because this isn't the area that you necessarily want to focus on. And so this is the challenge that we run in against. You want to go ahead and focus on your patients, but their privacy and the integrity behind what we do for them is super important. So that's one of the areas that we'll try to focus on today, and we'll show you where some of the items that we can go through a step-by-step process, really helping you change the way that you go ahead and communicate with your clients and really have a better understanding of security in your practice. So we'll walk through step by step. And one of the things I like to tell practitioners when we're communicating is all of the items that I'm going to talk to you about, it's going to take you about 2 to 3 hours to, if you were to go ahead and put all of these security measures in place, it's not going to be invasive for you, and it's not going to be difficult. So when you walk through this step-by-step process, you'll start to understand that if you look at the framework a little differently, and we'll walk through the steps, you don't necessarily need an IT professional coming on. If you guys have them in your practice, that's fantastic. But if you don't, we're going to give you the steps to walk through to make sure that you can go ahead and protect your practice anyways. So now one of the things that we're seeing in dental practices is, especially the last 2 years, and then things do not help in the landscape that we're looking with all of the virus stuff and all of the changes that we've seen, because anytime we have a pandemic, anytime we have some type of interference, it leads its way to criminals to access your information more. Why? They have another conduit to actually intrude inside your database. So one of the things that we start to look at, what are the statistics right now? Okay, well, when you look at most US companies and how they're being affected, the breaches are extensive. Okay, we're seeing hacks every 40 seconds. I mean, the numbers are expanding dramatically. And one of the things that, really is interesting, and this has been heavily inside the dental and medical community, is once a practice does have a breach, and the amount of time, energy, effort, and resources they need to place into, one, preventing the breach, dealing with their clients, maintaining their client base, and putting safeguards in place afterwards, they tend to underperform in the following subsequent years. So when you start to look at the magnitude of what one of these breaches can create, it goes much further than just an isolated incident that you're running into. So we try to get you to look a little deeper and look at the fact that, it is happening to small businesses. We see this across the US. We see it in dental practices specifically, because you are dealing with transmission of medical data. You guys are a highly sought after area to access information. Medical information there's a tremendous amount of value in this. And obviously, this, that's why we have all the attributes of HIPAA in place. However, as this transpires, we don't necessarily always see how deeply it can be invasive inside of our community. So now when we start to look at the breaches of email, and there's an inherent vulnerability. And one of the things that I like to try to bring to mind when we're discussing this is, one of the biggest challenges is you're seeing compromises are oftentimes starting with inside email. So we're going to try to teach you some of the ways that they're doing that, and how you can start to put safeguards and safety measures in place. And one of the things that I'll bring up is, no matter what, whenever we're dealing with trying to deal with security issues, it's kind of like a game of playing leapfrog, so to speak. Okay, we constantly are trying to, put up hurdles or roadblocks in place to prevent these things from happening. But what the good part is organizations like Identillect Technologies, one of the things that we do, we're constantly surveying what's happening in the security community, so that we're enhancing our products all the time, so that you're not constantly having to look into these aspects. We are helping do it for you. So you really don't have to pay as attention to some of these items, but let's walk through some of the regulatory requirements out there. Here's the nice part about it is, we're going to see all these different compliance regulations. Obviously, the one that we care most about is HIPAA, and the ones where we find violation the most is with HIPAA. Now, one of the things I'm going to tell you here is, everybody is concerned about an audit. Okay, am I likely to receive an audit if I'm in practice? And I'm going to be one of the first people to tell you, you are not likely to get a random audit, okay? But where does your trouble actually come from? Where are the challenges that you'll actually see? So, so as clients, as your patients have become much more aware of cybersecurity threats, and how do they become aware? Because they've had an incident. You know, when you look at the invasion of privacy of Americans in many different ways, people are becoming hyper aware of it if they have had an incident, whether it was their social media account that got hacked, whether it was something that transpired within their bank, whether they had a challenge with when they were filing their taxes. Some of these aspects that start to happen, people become hyper aware of. And where we see practices running into issue is, I've got a client, a patient that just came in. The patient is seeing the way we're performing our practice and doing a certain aspect of conveying information, and they become aware that this isn't necessarily the proper way to do it. So these are where we end up getting a report that goes back to HIPAA, and they say, so any individual can file a report that says, hey, there is a potential problem here. Those will be the places where you get the audit. It won't be a randomized audit. So where people are saying, you know, I see practitioners and I talk to them all the time, and usually where we get involved is where they've already had a data breach. We see that a lot. Now they're coming and asking for our assistance. And then we do start to evaluate the practice activities and all that type of aspects of what they're doing. When you look at trying to prevent these, the amount of prevention that you can put in place for, like I tell you, a very limited amount of time, energy, effort, and financial impact to your practice is very minimal. When you're trying to clean it up afterwards, it's much worse. So now when we look at what are we trying to protect, obviously, there's 18 personal identifiers, and any two of those 18 personal identifiers are going to create a violation of HIPAA. If I put two of them together and they're in conjunction with one another and the information is not encrypted in transit or at rest, now I've created an avenue for a problem. Now let's just take a look at what that means. So if I were going to send an email out and I put the individual's email address and I put the individual's name inside the document, all of a sudden now it's a HIPAA-driven item and it needs to be encrypted, okay? And some of the things where we don't necessarily realize that we're running into these and we have all of these identifiers in something. Now, let me also explain something which I think that many people look past. If your employees are also a patient of your practice, so you have worked on them at some point, every electronic communication you make to them from that point forward is considered HIPAA-based. So now you are required to protect that information from that point forward. So when we look at the scope of what we're needing to secure and protect, it becomes much larger than we originally anticipated. So now we start to look at, okay, what are the communications that I'm making? What are the communications that I'm making for my patients, for referrals? What are the communications that I'm making in reference to my employees? All of those type of aspects start to come into play. And these are a lot of the areas where we see they create a problem with an audit, okay? And as those audits hit, we start to see the fines increasing significantly. Now, I'll be the first to tell you, how do these audits break down and where the violations sit? The reality of it is HIPAA they're really actually reasonable in what they're requesting that we do. So they're saying, look, as long as you're making reasonable efforts and putting these certain things in place. Now, let's say you do encounter a violation. As long as the violation isn't egregious, meaning I haven't already had a problem in the past. So once you've had a problem, You had an action, it was noted by HIPAA. Now, if you have an action in the future, it becomes much more significant. Okay, so that's where you escalate on these different tiered levels of fines. Or let's say that you are aware of certain aspects, you've had an incident and you don't repair that incident. That's where when you get an audit, they go ahead and escalate the level of fine. And it can be quite substantial. And I've seen enough practices that have had that and had a substantial level of fines that it really, really can be crippling to a practice.
Excuse me.
So now yes.
Todd, if you can go back to the prior slide, I just want to make sure I'm following, because you say what category is your business, but these numbers, how do they, is this the number of prior
no.
infractions?
So what it is they have 4 levels of fining, okay? And basically, based on where you fall in a categorization, meaning, okay, if this is the first time I ever received an audit, and they did find an infraction, okay, that the initial infraction could either be, hey, look, we're going to go ahead and give you a warning and allow you to fix it, or we're going to fine you $110 per violation or per file, okay? So let's say that happened on the first scenario. Now, you went ahead and you did not repair or completely repair the problem that was requested. Now you have a future incident, okay? That future incident, they'll come back and do another audit. And in that audit, you may find yourself in a level 2 fine or a level 3 fine, which is the same file. Instead of costing you $110 for that file being violated, it now may cost you $1,100 per file.
So it's a function of history.
It's a function of history.
Yeah. Okay.
And if there's something that has been evoked in the past that has happened, even if it's a client that has come to you and said, hey, look, I'm concerned about this, and you don't make an adjustment, you still can find yourself evoked on a higher level of fine.
I see.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for clarifying.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question. Okay, so now we start to look at, we know what the landscape looks like. We understand what the challenges are before us, but how are they getting into us? What is happening? How are they penetrating our practices? And this is one of the big parts that we start to run into. So first off, we start to look at email spoofing. And this is something where they're typically impersonating or acting like they are a patient, acting like they're a referring practitioner, some way in which it's a common thread of communication you would receive, that you're willing to allow access, provide information, respond to requests, okay? And I'll have to say that these have gotten much more sophisticated in the last probably 2 years. So when you used to see these originally, understand, many of these are occurring outside the United States, meaning that they're intruding on our information, but the bad actor is not located within the US. That's why this becomes such a difficult issue. How do we go back and prosecute many of these individuals when they're not even inside our scope of prosecution? So this is where we run into many problems and really trying to alter or fix the problem. So now all of a sudden what we have is we have the government trying to create barriers, but they can only do so much because they can only take so much action against these individuals. Now, when you used to see on email spoofing, it would be poor English. You would see a lot of things that didn't quite make sense, and they were a little easier to identify. Obviously, now they've started to understand and started to know this is how we go ahead and alter some of this. So they're become much more sophisticated in doing so, and we'll walk through some of those examples as we move forward. Now, social engineering is much more difficult. Social engineering, I like to say it gets us to work against our own efficiencies. And what it does is it gets you to manipulate your own information. So I'm going to go ahead and somebody's asking for access. Let me give an example what we might see for social engineering. Somebody might call the individual that you have at the front desk. Let's say Jenny is working at the front desk, and they call up. They know who Jenny is. They call up and they say, you know what? Hey, we realized that your insurance for the company had not been, your personal insurance had not been completed. We just need a little bit more information from you. What we're going to do is we're going to send you over a quick email. What we need you to do is click and respond to that email. We want to get this done. It's Friday, and if we don't get it in by the end of the day, we won't be able to continue your insurance for the following month. This is the type of thread or the type of activity we would see. All of a sudden, everything sounds reasonable and logical. The email is properly formatted, the information is proper now, but now they've created a conduit to accessing your information, okay? And then ransomware. Ransomware is another animal entirely. And we've seen this from practitioners to local municipalities and state governments. We've seen this type of intrusion. Now, what happens is, we talked a little earlier about encryption. What is encryption? Well, first, the baseline of understanding is it's a mathematical formula that goes ahead and makes information only legible to the sender and the recipient, okay? Or the individuals we allow access to. Ransomware uses encryption, so it's a great technology. We know that it's super secure. So what they do is they say, if we can gain access to your hard drive, to your network, to your information, we're going to create our encryption over the top of your information. So what's one of the most valuable things you have? You have to have your client information. What happens if you can't bill your clients because you can't access the information? You can't even see who hasn't paid you. All of this stuff becomes very important to your practice. How much would that be worth if they prevent you from accessing your own information? So they lay a veil of security so you can't access your own data. And they say, let me go ahead and get money for you to go ahead and be able to access this information. Now, we'll walk through some of the dynamics of ransomware because it's very interesting why it's become much more prevalent in the last couple of years and how you can almost 100% guarantee you can prevent it if you take a few steps. So we'll walk through that in a second. Okay, so email spoofing. One of the things I will recommend to you is you will go ahead and what happens in email spoofing is typically the inbound messaging, and you see who it's from, does not match the outbound. So when I hit reply, it becomes a different address. Look, the internet's just it's a map, okay? And if I tell you to come over to my house, but I don't give you my address, you'll never find it, okay? So this is the same way the internet works. You still need a given address for it to arrive. But I can mask the address when it's coming in. What I can't mask the address when it's going out. So how do I go ahead and start to protect some of this information? Well, I will tell you, if you have a paid email service, now that would be, let's say you're using Microsoft 365 or you're using Gmail Business. That means the paid version of Gmail, not the free version, okay? Yes, it costs you a couple dollars a month, which isn't much. But what I will tell you gives you a lot of autonomy. What you can go ahead and say is, if the inbound email address and the outbound email address don't match, don't send it out. Don't let me reply to it, okay? So all of a sudden, you can help prevent a lot of these issues with a few little tweaks to your server. And I say server, and it sounds convoluted, but it isn't. There's literally a setting. Make the inbound messaging and the outbound messaging identification match or do not send. So these are very simple ways, but you have to do it on a paid version of email, okay? Not on a free version of email. Now, some of these things you'll see, like I said, some of the poor English, you may still see some of that. Certain aspects that you may see. Now, one of the things that obviously changes all of this is if you go ahead and you put email security on this, you can eliminate a lot of the email spoofing because there's authentication required by the sender and the recipient. And all of a sudden now that brings down that veil of problem that you're running into. The other thing is, you can put on free version of email. When an inbound email is coming in, do not let it automatically download images. So those pretty banners on the top of the email, don't let those download. Why? Okay, what you can do is those little banners have trackers in them, okay? You use them for marketing aspects, but you also can be used for a very negative aspect as well. And in those negative aspects, here's what can happen, is they can use that as a tracker or a tracer. If you don't let those images download, they can disallow that. Now, you can do that on all of the free versions of email that you're using right now, okay? So we start to look at how are they actually gaining access to our information? How are they finding our data, okay? Well, let me give an example of how easy it is to find information. Now, first off, we see all of these different data breaches that are happening. And you have to understand, when somebody's saying, hey, they went and accessed Target's information or whatever given TransUnion or whatever given aspect they're doing, what is the main thing they're looking for? They're looking for usernames and passwords, okay? Now, if I can get more advanced data than that, like somebody's full dossier, which we would call like a medical chart, which would be my social security number, so on and so forth. Obviously, that's the most amount of information, and that's what would be the most advantageous or worth the most amount of money. But when you look at pulling in information on somebody, login information, it's easy because people inherently want to make their lives easier. So in that, trying to make their life as simple as possible, what they'll do is make usernames and passwords similar or the same for multiple accounts. I did a lecture about a year ago, and I had a young lady come up to me afterwards, and she said, I'd really like to see what your lecture circuit is. Could you send me information? I said, sure, leave your information. We'll be happy to send something over. And she said, well, you just told me that we don't want to really give out our information. I'm like, hey, great, good you're listening. So through our conversation, we talked about 10 or 15 minutes, and she says, okay, I have an email address that isn't associated to me, but I can give it to you and I can access it if I need to. I said, perfect. I'll go ahead and send over the data. So I looked at this email address, and when I get back to my office and I sit down, I think, I'm a pretty smart guy. I'm going to have a little exercise in futility. I go ahead and take the email address and I say, let me take 10 minutes and do a search on it. So what do I get when I do a deep search? Okay, and what is publicly available for that individual? Remember what she said, this email is not associated with me. By that, I found out her name. I found out where she lives, what year she bought her house, how much she paid for it, where she went to university, what her four closest living relatives were, and 2 banking institutions that she belonged to. All of this from an email that doesn't necessarily belong to her. Realize that this is what we get when we look at publicly available information. These are what phishing attacks provide. Once we get a little bit of data on you, now I can use that data for a much deeper search. So if I get username and password for you, and this is all going to make sense as we pull it together here, but when I get username and password on you, now I go and research what institutions do you belong to, and I'm going to go through and use that access point for using to access your other locations. Now, the reality of it is 6 out of 10 people are duplicating those username and password logins. We're getting a little smarter, and we'll walk through what password sophistication looks like, but you can see how easily this starts to happen. And so when we start to look at how do these attacks start to happen, we see it on our mobile aspects. We see it in all different aspects of how we communicate. We see these challenges. Now, like I told you, social engineering is one of the most difficult areas because this is just a trickery, right? It's just convincing you to click or do something that you're not supposed to. There isn't a true amount of sophistication in it, but there's things that we can start to do to prevent it. One, we can become more educated on the tactics that they're using, okay? The ways in which they're having inbound information to try to convince us to click on that item or that thing, or check on what this, oh, I sent you over a document, can you please look at this? You know, all of these ways in which they're trying to access, oh, you have to, you know, there's been an attack on your Apple account, you have to go ahead and reset your password. All of these things, this is social engineering. So a couple things I'll say. Never click, never go and use the inbound link. If somebody is getting you to reset a password, go to their site, go in, log in, and reset your password. Don't use what they're providing you, okay? When you go in and you're using, you should look at using multi-factor authentication. We're going to go through that a little bit earlier, a little bit later, what that means, okay? Because it's really important you understand what it means. But it's using two ways to authenticate yourself. But why is it important? How? We'll go through it. We'll go through a specific slide and what that looks like. And then there's other ways you can use some of these products that are like physical key sets, or turning your mobile device into a physical key. So what that does is one of those things that's constantly changing, right? So sometimes maybe you've had something for your bank where it's got a little fob, and each time you click it, it spins a new code. These are making a device into a physical key changing device. It creates this multi-factor authentication or dual factor authentication in the same context. It just does it in a different way, okay? Now, we'll walk into the third aspect that we talked about, which is ransomware. Ransomware is really interesting in how it's come about, because why didn't you see this 5, 7, 10 years ago? Reason why you didn't see it, all the technology existed, okay? All the encryption existed. So why didn't we see this ransomware that's shielding us from accessing our own data? Why has it come to play now? And it's because of one reason, digital currencies, okay? You can create anonymity with digital currencies, right? So we're talking like Bitcoin, things like that, any of those cryptocurrencies. That means I can be anonymous. I can ask for money. So think about the movies that you've seen. Hey, drop a bag of cash in this trash can on the corner of Park and Hollywood, okay? That's what you're doing with Bitcoin, or you're doing with one of the cryptocurrencies. So I can pull your information or shield you from accessing your own data, but in order for it to be successful, I need the payday, right? How do I get the payday? Well, I can't say send me a check or let me run your credit card. That is a trail that would compromise me as the criminal. So what's enabled this is cryptocurrencies. So now I shield you from accessing your own data. I want the payday, and I may or may not unlock your data. It just depends, okay? So a couple things we can do to, and there aren't many things where you can say, I'm gonna 100% really avoid this affecting me. So ransomware, if you do two things, you can literally almost engage in saying, I'm not going to be affected by this. You could still be accessed by ransomware, but it can not affect your practice or the way you do business whatsoever. Let me explain, okay? So you need to encrypt your data, okay? So we're going to walk through how we hard disk encrypt, and how we encrypt data in transit. These are going to be the two most important things that you're going to learn of how to do this. And once we do this, all of a sudden now it's going to change the dynamic of what criminals can actually do to you. We're going to take away their power, okay? We're not going to be the low-hanging fruit. So that's one of the things that we start to change and how we can most help you. So offsite backups are important because I need to have somewhere where I can offsite backup my information so I can roll back. Now, what happens is if I encrypt my hard drive, okay, I encrypt all of the data. Even if somebody comes in and encrypts over it, what's the one thing I just achieved? I disallowed them to access the data. They disallowed me to access my own data too, right? Because they did invade my network. They did shield me from accessing my own data, but they can't read it either. So I functionally didn't, I had a breach, but it wasn't a reportable breach. It wasn't something that's going to adversely affect my clients, my patients, okay? Now, if I do this one step, now the other step would be, I need to be able to roll up my backup so that I can say, I'm not paying your money, I'm just gonna bring in my backup, and I disregard all the data that's there. So I don't even need to see it.
Todd, do you mind if I ask you a question?
Please, go for it.
Is timing a factor here? In other words, if you get your data locked or encrypted, so you can't access it, and then you subsequently perform a backup, have you contaminated the backup by doing that?
Yeah, so that's why when you use these offsite backup, yes, so you can contaminate the backup, but they usually give you stepwise separation when you use these more sophisticated backup processes like CrashPan, Carbonate, Barracuda. What they'll do is they allow you, it gives you several incidents of backup. So you say, okay, this one's contaminated.
Okay.
I roll
you may
back
lose some of the most
one.
current data, but if it's
might
done
lose
through the incremental backups, for instance.
Yes. So what it allows now is, one, because I encrypted my own hard drive, I know I don't have to report this. I do not have to report this breach. This is important because now I don't have to do a HIPAA reporting on this. Because what happened was, if say somebody has accessed encrypted data, it is like they didn't access it. So now you have that, and plus you roll in your backup. Within 15 minutes, I'm running again. This could have been something that could have devastated you for a month and had long-term repercussions. And all of a sudden, I've eliminated the problem in 15 minutes.
And it's not a reportable incident, which is...
It's not reportable. And all the things that we're going to learn today is going to prevent you from having to report, because anytime we say an encrypted file is accessed, it's functionally not accessed. So really important to understand. So perfect. Okay, so let's just look really quick at the ransomware anatomy, just kind of so you can see. So basically, they give you something, they give you a phishing aspect. What they do is some installation. It needs a command prompt. So there's going to be a command prompt in the email that happens. You initiate the command prompt, the command locks down the information, then they ask for the money. Okay, and it's very amazing how easily they're able to do it. I had just so you know, I had consulted on a legal practice that had this done. It cost them $50,000, and I paid it because losing the information would have cost them significantly more than that. And when you look at and all you got to do is a little homework on how devastating it actually can be to your practice, because we look at it as just a small microcosm, but when you look at the rippling implications to your practice, it's significant. Let's pass that. Okay, so let's walk through how we start to protect. So let's walk through step by step of what things do I need to protect and what do I care about? Because at the end of the day, we can talk about here are the implications to me if I don't do it. Here is the problem of people trying to access my data. But how do I solve it, right? You can try to give me all of the challenges that surround these areas, but I want to go back and practice medicine. I want to go back and work with my patients. That's what I care about. That's where I make my money. I don't want to waste my time with this stuff. So the whole goal here is that you don't extend the time that you're putting into it, but you're very productive in what you're doing. Okay, so one of the main things when we talked about ransomware or losing data, having a computer compromised, is the hard drive encryption. One of the things that I'll tell you first off is front-end passwords, okay? When you receive when you go ahead and you log into your laptop, you log into your computer and you see that front-end password, that is not encryption. I can break a front-end password inside 3 minutes, okay? And I'm not really, that's not my area of expertise, but they're really easy to do. So front-end passwords are not going to do something for you. It's a false sense of security. Encrypting the data is what does something for you. Now, the good part is when you look at modern computers, modern devices, they're starting to come with onboard hard disk encryption. So let's take a look. If you're using Windows 10 and up, it already has it built in. You don't even have to pay for it, okay? It's already there. All you have to do is initiate it. It literally takes 4 steps, okay? In the search window down below, hit BitLocker, okay? It'll go ahead, it'll bring it up, you'll enter a password, you'll secure it, you'll ask you if you want to secure the entire hard drive, it'll start encrypting it, it'll be done inside 20 minutes, and your hard drive is encrypted. It's already there. Now, if you have an older version of Windows, you can purchase it. I think it's like $50, okay? It's relatively inexpensive. Apple, same thing. They use a system called Firewall. It does the same exact thing. Do your search for Firewall, do the 4 steps. It's not difficult. You gain a tremendous amount of control. And remember, if you're ever to get an audit, these things are super important. Did you take these steps? Okay. The other thing a lot of people there are doing right now are doing cyber insurance. Okay. Realize that all of these cyber policies, they require you do these steps or the policy is null and void. Okay. It means it's not worth the paper it's printed on. You need to make sure you're doing the minimum standards to keep your information safe. And then if you have a breach outside of that, they'll go ahead and they'll protect it. They'll go ahead and reimburse for it. But if not, you won't. Now, if you were to start to do these type of steps and you have if you go ahead and have a HIPAA audit, this goes a tremendous amount of way for you, protecting yourself and limiting the problems that you have, okay? Now, step 2, we're gonna walk through Firewall, okay? What do we need to do to make sure your firewall is doing what it's supposed to do? First off, what's its job? Its job is to monitor traffic. It's trying to stop people from accessing or going into your network or into your hard drive or into your access point, okay? The good part is you'll find that you'll have one in your operating system. You'll find that you're going to have one in your antivirus system. And the good part is they work really well together. Here's what they need: your intervention, okay? They need your intervention to make sure that you search them on your computer, search your firewalls that are available to you, and then what you're going to do is make sure they're auto updating, okay? And I say, for me, I make everything auto update every 24 hours. And we'll go to the lengths at which you need to do this a little further down in the lecture. But what's important here is every one of these updates that we're putting out. Remember, what did I tell you? We're playing a little bit of a game of leapfrog, okay? We go ahead and put up a barrier. They jump over our fences. We got to put up a new fence, okay? Just the way it works. It's, you know, we're smart and criminals are smart too. And so we need to keep trying to keep staying one step ahead of them. Okay, so what happens is when you see the patches that are happening on these firewalls, 90% of them are security driven. They're not activity or user interface driven. They're security driven. So what happens if you have a firewall that you haven't updated for 6 months, a year, 2 years? It's pretty much worthless. So one of the things that you have to make sure of is it updating, and is it updating every 24 hours? You might have 2 or 3 different firewalls. Search for them on your computer. Very easy to do. And then once you do that, go ahead and make sure they're auto updating every 24 hours. You'll save yourself a tremendous amount of problem. Okay, so let's walk through mobile device, because obviously there's a lot of communication that we're going to see on mobile devices that are creating interference into our network. When we have this bring your own device aspect, okay, which meant it allowed the commingling of personal and private information onto where I have business information, it created a problem. It created an access point, okay? You need to go ahead and make sure that you're watching what's happening with your mobile device. So first off, we look at antivirus. I find this really interesting. Most people wouldn't turn their computer on without putting antivirus on it. We go ahead, but how many of you have checked if you have antivirus or engaged your antivirus on your mobile device? I'm always amazed when I talk to people and how few actually do it. So the reality of it is usually the antivirus that you're using on your computer, they have a conduit for your mobile device, okay? Sometimes they have a nominal fee for it, $1 a month, or sometimes there's no additional fee and you just are able to utilize that from the antivirus that you already purchased for your computer. Super important, make sure you're doing it. Okay, we're going to move down here to complex passwords, okay? I'll mention a couple quick things on this because we are going to visit passwords a little later on in the lecture. But let me tell you, don't use a 4-digit PIN code on your mobile device because they're easy to hack. Don't use the draw pattern because they're easy to hack. I like when since COVID's happened, I used to do a ton of in-person lectures in the most previous years, but this past year, we've done a lot fewer. But when I do in-person lectures, what I do is I ask anybody who has pattern-based security on their mobile device. I have somebody raise their hand. I'll walk over. I'll hold the device up to the light. I can see the grease pattern on where they're drawing their pattern, and I open their device up, okay? So realize these are really easy to do. Biometrics I like a lot, okay? They're not 100% foolproof, but biometrics are really good. That means iris scan, facial recognition, fingerprint analysis. They're really good, but you still need to have a heavy front-end password, and we'll define what a heavy front-end password looks like, but let us get to that in a few minutes. VPN protection, and we'll get a little deeper into this as well, but virtual private network. Now this means that everything that passes from my device outside is vulnerable. There's 2 things that I need to do. I need to encrypt that data, and I need to try to shield the access to the web pages that I'm going to. That's virtual private network, okay? It's pretty simple to do. There's an application you'll download onto your mobile device. I use one on my computer. I use one on my mobile device. They're super beneficial. I like them a lot, and it'll slow you down maybe 10%, meaning you'll see about 10% degradation in speed, but it's minimal. Here's the last item, MDM, mobile device management. And I think I might have another slide on this. Give me 1 second here. No. So mobile device management is super important. What is mobile device management? This is something that allows you to separate your personal information from your business information. Okay, why is that important? Are your employees accessing information? Are you communicating things back and forth with them? And they have every social media account available to them. You need to be shielding that. Remember when we talked about a paid email account, I urge you to do this, okay? If you have Gmail, if you have Microsoft, just pay the $1 or $2 that it takes to get the account. It's minimal, but it will. There's certain inherent protections built into it. This is one of them, mobile device management. What it does is say, I'm going to shield all the business data and not let anybody in my personal information be allowed to touch it. I can also, if I fire Sandy or Alex from my practice, I can wipe the data or their ability to access the data from their mobile device. Okay, if I lose my mobile device, I can wipe all my business data off of it. Okay, it's a super good thing. And when I tell you, when you pay for your email account, they will include mobile device management with it. Okay, so it's a nominal fee when you get the business plan for your current email that you're using. You're not having to change your email address. You're just having to alter some of the attributes in the back end. This is one of them, or one of the benefits that you'll receive. And it'll prevent stuff like this. We see this mobile ad fraud. This just came in to one of my employees a couple days ago. So this is all current stuff that's happening. And what you'll see is anytime you're downloading any application, give you an idea. Shopify, which is Shopify is like it's shop. It's one of these, hey, if I'm going to have a package delivered, they're going to use this to have my package delivered, okay? And it's going to give me all my information. I went to go have a package delivered. They said, yeah, just log in, utilize this information, and it'll do it. Well, they wanted access to my contacts. They wanted access to my images. They wanted all kinds of different access points, and almost everything all the things that you download, they're going to ask you for this same stuff. They're going to ask you for access point to all of this information. Well, where's the problem? The problem is you're actually giving them a tremendous amount of autonomy to your data. When we are using mobile device management, you shield yourself from this type of intrusion. So be aware when you're downloading these applications, what are you giving them autonomy to? My real suggestion is, like, for example, your bank, where if your bank uses these and all that kind of stuff, I don't use them. I utilize the open internet for it. There's honestly a much greater security in doing it, and they don't require all the access points to your personal data. So you have to worry if they get hacked, now that it is coming back to me. So I try to limit those amount of areas, and you can do a lot of this in your app-based securities and privacy. If you go into your mobile device, you have app security and privacy, and it'll ensure that these things don't have all the access, because they're going to ask for complete open access to everything on your mobile device. Walk through each one of these. Look at what the permissions they're asking for. Pull those permissions back. It's important, okay? It will change what you're vulnerable to. Your Bluetooth, okay? Don't make yourself visible Okay, you can allow yourself to connect to something, but once you're connected, take away the visibility of your device to other devices. Many times it wants to initiate or hold the phone visibility as on all the time. Take it away, right? Because you do not want them to be able to, if you're visible, now they can start to gain an access point. You want to limit all of this. Oh, so this is where we actually, this slide should have been back there, but mobile device management. Like I said, when you deploy this application through G Suite or O365, what it does is it just separates your data and allows you autonomy over business data. It's super valuable in what it creates and the protections that it creates. Wi-Fi. Here we go, guys. If you have an old Wi-Fi device at your house or at your place of business that you guys use, if it's older than about 2 years, 2.5 years, get rid of it and get a new one. Okay, here's why. Those devices are using WEP and WPA based securities. Okay, those are super easy to access, and there usually isn't a patch that allows you to get past and allows you to upgrade those to a level of WPA2 or WPA3. These are the two gold standards that you want to use. Okay, make sure that and it's really easy to figure out, because if your device, let's say your device is 3 years old, go back to your internet service provider, exchange it for a new one. Super easy to do, won't cost you any money. You're probably already paying for it. If you're not and you purchased it, go purchase the new one. It's $100. Okay, this is a super easy way for people to access or violate your networks, and make sure that they're really easy to prevent this from happening. The other way that people are accessing through Wi-Fi is where they're either piggybacking on a network. So I'm able to access point now. So let's just go back. I'm using WEP or WPA. It's really easy to piggyback. What it does is I'm able to access in between your network, and I can get all the traffic that's being conveyed. Okay, so you need to make sure that you have a strong network so that this piggybacking doesn't happen. The other thing is when we see evil twin attacks. Okay, if I'm going to go to I'm going to go and stay at a hotel. When you look at that hotel, they are, you might say, hey, it's the Radisson or the Hyatt or whatever it is. And what you're going to do is it'll say, oh, just access this network at Hyatt too. Well, a lot of times they're allowing the same credentialing that you are, but it's not even the network that you're associated to for that hotel. It's an evil twin, and they're gaining access to everything that you type in and every transmission that you have. Okay, wireless sniffing. These are, it's just what it says. We're looking at passwording information, any of this stuff that we're opening up, and how do you prevent all of this? Anything that we're opening up to allowing information to be read, you're going to go ahead and prevent this with a VPN. Remember, we talked about this a little earlier. The VPN is important. It's going to start to shield some of this stuff where you're typing in your passwords at any of your like banking information, things like that. These are some of the things that's going to help shield you from. Okay, and there's many good ones out there. I use one called Nord, but it isn't necessarily the specific one you may want to use. It's a good one. It's top 5 in the market. And so those are some of the ones that I would look at, but it's an important aspect for your activity when you're going back and forth across communicating with your mobile device or with your computers. When you're accessing websites, it helps shield the data. Okay, it helps shield from bad actors. Okay, now password hygiene. We went through, we talked a little bit about this, but really, what's it mean? So first off, when we look at password hygiene, the use of passwords or usernames over multiple accounts. Okay, I'm telling you, it is one of the biggest travesties out there, and I see it time and time again. And I explain how easy it is to access that information. And many people are not using multi-factor authentication. We'll get to that right at the end about why multi-factor is important and how much it actually prevents people from accessing your information. Okay. Now the next part would be is if you're going to use a sophisticated password, what am I going to do? How do I keep track of all these? If they're not all the same, how do I do it? Well, you're going to do it through a password manager. And I have people say, well, if I'm having one location that I keep my passwords, am I not putting myself at greater risk? And is there a possibility that somebody could ever hack that? Yes. No security is 100% foolproof, right? Everything has some vulnerability at some level. Now, if you look at these ones that I've given you, 1Password, Bitwarden, Dashlane, KeePass, these are really good tried and true services, and they have put together a tremendous amount of security behind what they do. Okay, so the chances of that information being accessed are very, very, very minimal, and it allows for you to use sophisticated passwords. So if you look all the way at the bottom of the page, that is an example of a good password. And you say, how the heck am I supposed to remember that? Well, you're not going to. Okay, it's almost impossible to. You use a password keeper, you use these to go ahead and distribute and utilize your passwords. These passwords are very hard to hack. When you look at what is the minimalization I should have on a password, it's a minimum of 12 characters, okay? And symbols, numbers, and capitalization, because if I'm brute forcing a password, if you have a 6-digit password, I can brute force through it in 60 seconds. It's easy, okay? But once we start looking at the increase of characters, the problem becomes dramatically more significant. It would take years to get through and brute force that password. So, and then it allows you to diversify the password and still keeping it very, very strong and a tremendous amount of integrity. So I would never be concerned on the using these password keepers. The chance of you having an issue with them are infinitesimal compared to all of the other challenges that you're going to want to protect yourself from. Now we start to look at updating software. Okay, this is really we hit it a little bit when we were talking about updating our firewall. Realize this is one of the largest issues. I just did a mobile device lecture, and on average, when you're looking at a Android device, they're 12 to 18 months. The user hasn't updated the software for 12 to 18 months. Okay, Apple, it's not as bad because they force you, right? They keep, every time you go to access something, they pop up and make you install the software. They keep bugging you. All right. So, and actually, if you are a Android user, there is Google is trying to do something. They have not achieved this yet, but there is speculation that they're going to do this, or they're attempting to achieve this year. If they do, this will help you tremendously. And what Google is trying to do is they're trying to put out a product that updates every bit of your software across everything in your platform all at once, and it does it intrinsically. Okay, this has not been achieved yet, but if it does, I'll be the first to sign up. If you look at your operating system, your browser Who updates your browser? I guarantee you, few of you are updating your browser. And sometimes the browser will force it, but they're usually only enforcing it when they've stopped servicing the current version that you're on, okay? Because the technology that's required for them to force it every time is a lot more difficult. But here's what happens is, remember, what did I tell you? On these software updates, 70% of all the software updates is driven by security, okay? So what we're doing is all of the stuff that we're getting you to update is security based. If you don't do it, what's happening is your everything that's happened from the last update, all of the new intrusions, we can't identify them. So when you say, hey, we patched this hole, and every software out there is like this. Microsoft, they call it Patch Tuesday. They patch the first Tuesday of every month. Why do they do this? It's because, and it's always security driven, okay? And the reason why they do it is because criminals are smart and they're constantly looking for new ways to access data, and we constantly have to go ahead and protect it. And the software company is only as good as you hitting the update. You don't hit the update, they can't move forward with things. Okay, so it's important. Update all of these aspects and do it on a level where you have the ability to move forward. And once you set the standard on them, hey, I want to update every 24 hours, you don't have to touch them again, okay? But go through that specific aspect. Now, multi-factor. Multi-factor, I will tell you, there's two things that you're going to do here after we're done today that you're going to start doing, and it's going to put the ability for you to protect data on a whole different plane, which is encryption, right? Because we're talking about, and the last part we'll get to is encryption in transit, okay? But encryption at rest, which we dealt with hard disk encryption, okay? The encryption process is one aspect, and the second is the passwording or the accessing, okay? Multi-factor authentication. I'm going to tell you something that's really interesting. So in Las Vegas, every year, they have a conference. And to me, I think it's really profound that they have this conference every year. It's called Black Hat Conference, okay? And what it is for all the hackers, all the bad guys across the world, they all meet in Vegas once a year and they exchange ideas on how to steal our data. You say, how can this even happen, right? How can they even have a conference like this? Well, it's all anonymous. And what they do is they exchange data and how they can cripple networks, right? Because all hackers are very proud of what they've achieved in having the ability to take your data. So if you look at the last Black Hat Conference, they interviewed many of the hackers, and what they said was, what are the biggest things that are creating problems for you to get the information you need to get to steal people's data? They said encryption and multi-factor authentication. Those are the two things. So you deploy these two things, you're going to cripple their ability to access or steal your patient data. Okay, multi-factor authentication, what does it mean? Okay, it is something I have, okay, which is like a mobile device or something that they're delivering a code to, okay? Something you are, which would be some type of biometric type credentialing that we've talked about, iris scan, facial recognition, fingerprint analysis. Something that you know, which is my login credentials, okay? This is my username and my password, okay? Or some type of phone or positive layer of verification that people are contacting you back. Multi-factor authentication requires two of these, two of the four, in conjunction to access a specific account. Now, where should you use this? Well, your email should be multi-factor, okay? Your login for, you have a patient data portal or anything like that, that should be multi-factor. Okay, your access to your bank should be multi-factor. Okay, these things, you reduce your vulnerability from somebody to access that by 90% just by doing this. Yes, is it an extra step, and does it take you an extra 4 seconds? Yes, it does. Okay, and people say, well, that's inconvenient. Here is my philosophy behind it. It's a couple of seconds. Kind of let's just get past that, because the challenge is we want things convenient, but having somebody take your information or take your data or take your patient's data or affect your practice like this is a much greater issue. Multi-factor authentication is a great way to help prevent that. Now, the last aspect we're going to get to is data in transit. Okay, realize data in transit is the most vulnerable type of information that we possibly have. Okay, so it's one thing to encrypt. We talked about encrypting our hard drive. That's one thing, to be able to encrypt that data in its as a whole, because it's stationary. It's pretty easy to overlay a mathematical code to say I'm going to protect this data. Now, what gets much more difficult is to secure information in transit, because what do I need to do? I need to make sure that the information is, one, wholly encrypted. So here's one of the things that is required, and this is one of the things I want to bring back to you guys. One of the things that's required by HIPAA, and if you look at how they're asking, so there's tunnel-based encryption, which would be a VPN like we spoke of, would be, I'm sure you've heard of these terms, SSL or TLS. Your bank uses SSL or TLS to transmit data. That does not pass the minimum standard for what HIPAA requires. They require true end-to-end encryption on information in transit. Okay, so all that means to you is, if you're saying, hey, look, well, the email provider I'm using uses SSL to transmit data, and I know that's secure. It's not the minimum standard required by HIPAA, and you would be violating, okay? And you would be fined. So you need end-to-end based encryption. Well, Identillect Technologies, what we provide is a secure end-to-end encryption that plugs directly into your Gmail, plugs directly into Outlook, it plugs directly into O365, and it's seamless, okay? What it does is it gives you this AES 256. That's the standard. That's the standard that HIPAA requires for you to meet the minimum to protect patient data when you're transmitting data, okay? So what you're going to do is focus on all of this type of information. Now, what it's going to allow is, it allows you to control the data. It allows you to retract information. It allows you to enforce security protocols. What's it looking for? Remember, we talked about 18 personal identifiers, okay? 18 personal identifiers are really important because it'll analyze and it'll look at the information. It's trying to identify this information in through the email. So if your employee forgets to go ahead and encrypt an email that you're sending out on a patient that should be encrypted, it looks and it forces it. It enables all this to happen outside you having to babysit it. You don't have to do any of these activities. You get to control it. The other thing it allows is for large file transfer, okay? What's that mean? It'll allow you to send an email up to 1 gigabyte in size. Why is that important? Well, you guys are submitting x-rays all the time. These are type of things that you guys will need to transmit that are very large files. We don't require you to jump through any additional hoops. It'll also allow you to retract an email. Why is this important? Well, sometimes we get very free as we're going through our day, and we go ahead and we say, I'm sending this to Dr. Michaels. Well, it accidentally sends it to Mike Hernandez, okay? And all of a sudden you're like, oh, I've got a problem. I sent this information, it was supposed to go to Dr. Michaels, I sent it to Mike Hernandez. Now, all of a sudden, the information's gone, it's encrypted. I can retract that information right away. I literally have the ability to fully retract that data, and like I never sent the email. Okay, it allows for you to have autonomy in all access of the of data in transit. Like I told you, this is one of the hardest things to control or to identify and to say, look, we're going to get our arms around this and make sure this isn't creating an issue for our employees or for how we're communicating data. So what this allows is it plugs right into any of your existing email systems and allows you to have true control. Now, in all of these aspects, what we'll do is we have this smart scan technology, and it's like I told you, it's always looking for this data. So if you ever have a HIPAA audit, they'll say, how do you know which emails that should be secure are secure? Well, this is how I know. We use the smart scan technology. It looks for everything. It auto encrypts or forces the encryption for any of these aspects. We do multi-factor authentication. We go ahead and put enforcement policies. The other piece that they require when you're looking at HIPAA-based data is audit trailing. We do full audit trails behind it. And then the last aspect that we have is the information is wholly encrypted every place it goes. So we allow all that. And then finally, here's the biggest part that people don't realize that they're violating HIPAA. Let's just say if you're using a secure way to give people information, but they go ahead, they look up on your website, they inbound information to you. You didn't know the information was coming in, but they go ahead and send information and they send it insecure, okay? But it's HIPAA-based data. You have responsibility to that, okay? So you have a responsibility that you have to provide inbound accessing for that data to be secured, encrypted in a HIPAA-based manner for inbound data. So the nice part is we allow that information to come into your website where you can actually have the inbound communications coming in from your website. Those can be driven right through our system too. So everything they inbound. And then we also put at the bottom of your signature, we put an inbound signature link. So you can also say, click here to inbound me a message. Now, what does that do? That allows that any aspect of HIPAA you've covered, if you get an audit, now you have control over what's transpired, and you are able to ensure that the data has been secured in all aspects, okay? So one of the things that we're doing in this, with this lecture is not only are you getting educated, but we're allowing access or allowing you to have this special offer through this process where we're doing our providing Identillect encryption in each of the platforms that we discussed earlier for less than $10 a month, that you can go ahead and integrate this into your business plan. And so it's super easy to do, and it's one of the largest things that you can do to protect your patient data. And it's one of the biggest things that you would be fined in on or have issue with if you had a HIPAA audit.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Todd. Boy, you were right spot on. I was about to give you a time check because we do want to get to some questions. We've had a number of questions submitted, but I also want to, I asked Todd when he explained this program to me, and if you're all wondering what the catch is, the answer is literally that there is no catch. That's the fee for the service. It depends, of course, on how many email accounts you want to be under the plan, but you can literally experience the benefits of Todd's offering for that fee. So no, there'll be no surprises. All right, let's move on to the questions here. I'm reading through some of these. Some of these were submitted earlier in the talk, so you did eventually answer some of these questions, but I think the ones I'm going to ask you bear a little bit of elaboration and underscoring. So let's start with this one. and I don't think that you did address this one precisely, but does your solution appeal, or I guess is it applicable to any size practice?
Yeah, so that's a nice part about this is, we go ahead. So we've dealt with practices that have had 30 different locations, have multiple aspects to it. The way we're able to segment our product, that we can even integrate. So we'll find where we say, hey, look, you know what? There's a practice, they're a very small practice. They have one doctor and 3 assistants, and that's it. We accommodate that very easily. We can get them set up in a few moments. In a large scale practice, we get all of the controls and the autonomy that you would want from a more administrative level to reach out to all these practices to control behaviors and to ensure security across a larger network. And that can be done in the same amount of really easy access and control, depending on whatever size practice that you need.
Great. Our next question, I'm not very tech savvy. Is your product easy to use? And as a user myself, I can answer that one. The answer is yes, but why don't you go ahead and answer it?
So this is one of our main goals. When we developed this, that's the biggest problem with security, right? It's easy for the people that are technically savvy to use technical products, but those aren't the people that are usually using them. It's people that are not technology savvy, and that's what we built this. We built it around the most minimum level of understanding or interface for your lowest technical person, but providing the most amount of benefit for accessing this technology. So it's super easy to use and super easy at any level.
I have heard that with solutions of this type, the recipient has to sign up just to view the encrypted email. Is that the same with your solution?
Yeah. So yeah, this is a big problem. So typically what happens is, what we're trying to prevent giving up our data. You'll receive an inbound message and they say, okay, here's what you have to do is divulge all your data to be able to access and look at the email. We don't do that because the way our system works, it is completely autonomous of trying to capture or take your data. So what we've done is we've said, look, it's an inbound message to the recipient. There is minimalized access and effort. What we usually say is if a recipient can't access the email in 3 seconds, we're not doing our job.
Right. No, and I've experienced that for myself. That was my first question, was what's the experience of the recipient? And I sent them to my wife and to some friends. They had no problem with it at all. So that's great. What is the maximum file size I can send out? I think you said it was a gig. Is that correct?
Yep, gigabyte. Yeah.
All right, good.
You won't find any other services that are doing that without doing some kind of ridiculous large file transfer problem. So here's one of the things that I always get asked. Okay, I send out an email. The person has Gmail on the other end. The max inbound size is 30 megabytes. And how are they going to be able to access it if it's a gig? Okay, here's the reason why. We hold the data in our secure environment. This is giving them an access point to securely see it and securely download it. But there's no setup on their part. It's completely seamless for them.
That's interesting. So the maximum file size for the recipient's server is not a constraint. That does not come into play. Excellent. Correct. And then finally, I think you've answered this. Do I need an IT team to set up your product?
So I would say not only do you not need an IT team, because many of the organizations that we service, they don't have access to that. And so this is their hesitation on implementing aspects like this. This is something where not only to install, to set up, and to manage, this is important. Anytime you need to make an adjustment, you don't need to go ahead and call your IT professional and ask them to do that. It's the way we've designed and developed it, it's seamless and it's simple. And at the lowest common denominator, you can go ahead and make install setup. So usually install and setup you'll do it in under 10 minutes, okay?
Terrific.
And then any type of adjustments or changes, you can make them on the fly, and it takes 30 seconds. So super easy.
I've gone through it twice. I've gone through it twice because when we got our new system, we had to redo it, and it's literally under 10 minutes. We do the install, and we're off and running. So that's fantastic. Your presentation was fantastic. I want to especially thank you for the generous offer. I hope that everybody on the call will recognize it for what it is and take advantage of this, because you can't get peace of mind that cost effectively anywhere these days.
For sure.
Now I just want to remind everybody, you'll soon receive an email with instructions on how to receive your CE credit, as well as how to take advantage of Todd's offer. We'll include that in the post-event email. And I now want to invite you to mark your calendars for Thursday, March 18th at 6 p.m. Central Time, when our next Practice Perfection special guest presenter will be Dr. Carlo Biasucci, practicing dentist and founder of Elite Practice. After surviving an injury that almost ended his career, Dr. Biasucci was determined to change his practice from a beast of burden to a business that would allow him to live life on his terms. He took his already successful $2.4 million practice, tripled it in 3 years, and cut his work week in half. He now spends 100% of his time sharing exactly how dentists across North America and overseas can get off the treadmill of trading hours for dollars. His presentation is entitled 5 Ways Your Practice is Bleeding Money and How to Stop It Now: Your Success Blueprint in the COVID Economy. It is must viewing, and I hope that you choose to attend. Until then, this is Danny Bobrow, thanking you for your ongoing commitment to practice perfection. Goodbye, everybody.